Joining me to discuss this are the Leave supporter and Conservative MP John Redwood and the Labour MP and Remainer and member of the Exiting the European Union Select Committee, Seema. Malhotra, welcome to you both. I mean, we heard David Davis there saying we need to avoid a cliff edge. I mean, you're not too bothered about a cliff edge
There is no cliff edge. No, of course they're going to carry on trading with us. All they need to make up their minds about in the EU is do they want to trade with some tariffs under world trade rules or with no tariffs as we have at the moment. Britain is very generously saying, let's carry on with no changes, no new barriers, no new tariffs. I think they may in the end want that, but obviously they're delaying because they think they can get some money out of us.
What, in your view, would the cliff edge mean?
Well, I'm quite frankly amazed that John Redwood just said that, because I think what's become fairly apparent is the government's finally caught up with what many have been saying since the start, which is that you need to make sure that you've got a smooth Brexit. You don't want a Brexit that means that companies or even people in terms of our rights don't know what's going to be happening, what we're going to have to pay for, whether it comes to manufacturing, how you're going to be developing goods as well as trading goods, what rights your employees are going to have. There are so many things that are that need to be sorted out in order for there to be a smooth Brexit for our economy, and to make sure that British businesses don't have the uncertainty that mean they're possibly likely to leave the UK. I mean, there is so much to do to make sure that this does not have a negative impact, that families don't become poorer, that we don't see a further decline in the economy. I think what's happened today in that statement by David Davis is the recognition that he has to now say something publicly, because privately he's been hearing from businesses and many others about their deep concerns about Brexit and the government's approach so far.
I mean, by the cliff edge, it means effectively that the works get gummed up at the end of March 2019, that lorries queue up in either side of the Channel Tunnel and all the rest of it.
We have systems at the moment for handling non-EU trade through our ports. And if they don't want a free trade agreement of the kind we've offered, then we will just be trading with them as if they were... What crosses
the channel is EU trade, and wouldn't the cliff edge mean that those lorries simply wouldn't be able to...
No, of course not, because there's already a system of pre-registering and electronic information and sealing lorries and investigating just a few to see that everything is going according to plan. And so this is all fuzzy scaremongering of the worst kind. It's Project Fear on stilts, you know?
It's far from that, isn't it? It's about clarity about the legislation under which we'd be operating, about what we might expect from each other in terms of standards, about how those standards might be enforced, and about how you effectively operate together across boundaries.
Yeah, but you see, if you're...
fairly fundamental questions.
Yeah, I understand that, but if you are so worried about this, surely you have to accept that the government is going to need some executive powers to sort out the small print of transferring 12,000 laws into English law. I mean, what's the problem with that? I mean, a Labour government would need exactly the same sort of powers.
Well, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a process. I think what is pretty staggering about what the government's proposing in the EU withdrawal bill is the lack of proper scrutiny over what those powers could be used for and where they would be used, effectively giving possibly a blank cheque to ministers to be creating, making decisions, policy decisions, and creating laws through the back door.
So it's not the actual executive power you're objecting to in the withdrawal bill, it's the scope of it.
The problem is why you would need those powers in that way if you are going to have Parliament be involved in the process. I think what this has been a sign of is that the government has tried to avoid parliamentary scrutiny all the way through this process, and this is yet just another example. If it wasn't so serious, you wouldn't have Dominic Grieve saying, and I quote, "At present the withdrawal bill does not address the issues that it's intended to, and worse still, it confers powers on the executive to carry out Brexit that no sovereign parliament worth its name should allow." Now that is a Conservative member of Parliament, a respected QC, somebody who's been a senior law officer. I think what's incredibly important is that we build the consensus that we've always argued for about how we do Brexit, do it in a way where there's proper scrutiny and accountability, and that you don't see the law being changed through the back door when really this was about transferring the law.
And the Labour position is nonsensical. I mean, do you come to Parliament? We debate very little other than Brexit day after day.
No,
we had a huge principled debate before we decided to leave by sending the Article 50 letter. We have a Brexit Select Committee. We had a Brexit question time today. We're about to have very major technical legislation to guarantee all those rights and laws.
Do you accept that the withdrawal bill, as outlined, is going to give the executive unprecedented power,
No, of course
not to adapt laws, but to change them.
No,
if
of course
wants.
it isn't. It's the very opposite. We had unprecedented powers for the EU to legislate for us without Parliament being able to amend or say
that
no.
power's not being given back to
and
Parliament.
This
It's
power
being given
is
back to
coming
the
back. No,
executive.
it is being given back to Parliament. This is where it's so misleading. We're arguing about whether something should require a full act of Parliament or a statutory instrument. Now, a statutory instrument is debatable and votable in Parliament. If by any chance a
Not
minister...
always.
It's always, because if you put one through suggesting as government that they don't vote on it, the opposition can say, oh no, we're going to vote on that, and they can demand a debate and a vote. So the opposition will be alert. If a minister made a mistake and did a little bit too much by statutory instrument, Parliament would just simply vote it down and say, no, you've got to do that by primary legislation.
It's been very unclear in the bill about what might go through which particular procedure, and it's quite technical about which particular procedure.
But do you accept you have that fail-safe of debating
well, actually,
statutory
for thousands of possible decisions through statutory instruments, when you don't have the parliamentary time, when effectively the government's saying, we don't have the time, we'll make the decision, and maybe we'll come back, and if in 30 days or a limited period we manage to get the time to have a debate and reverse it. I mean, this is not the way to make these huge decisions about our country when the government promised that it will want to protect the rights that we've got already and to not see businesses negatively impacted and the economy put at risk. There's got to be far more that the government brings forward in order to provide the safeguards we need for proper scrutiny and in order to allow a Brexit that has the confidence of Parliament and of British industry and the British people.
But it's Labour who are trying to stop the certainty and the continuity. This bill is completely harmless. It's the way to guarantee all those employment rights that Labour
John,
keep
what's
on
your
about.
response to
And we
Dominic
want to
Grieve,
guarantee
then?
them. We're offering you a piece of legislation, and now you say you're going to try and vote it down. It's just crazy of you to do this.
What's your response to the Tory MP, Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, with the concerns that he's raised about the bill?
Well, I just had a 20-minute conversation recorded with him before doing this interview, and we got on fine. His issues are very much second-order issues about the language of the protections in the legislation.
But that's exactly what Seema Malhotra is
He entirely agrees. Just listen to me for a minute. He entirely agrees with the government that we need this bill, and he will vote for it on second reading. And he wishes to make sure that when the government says it's not going to use a statutory instrument for anything important that changes the law, they mean it. I'm sure they mean it. There will be language that reflects that.
As I understand it, he will vote for it on second reading. He is not committed to voting for it in its final stages unless he gets his amendments through. And he thinks
said
those
that
amendments are pretty important.
He didn't think he'd be voting against third reading either. But I don't think this is a serious argument, because I think certainly Mr. Grieve and the government and myself are all in agreement that ministers are only going to do technical things by statutory instrument, which Parliament
we have to trust them, don't we?
No, you don't have to trust them, because you're going to have the opposition able to call it in and veto it if they don't like it, you know?
You know that with the scale of the changes that has to happen, you know that with the way in which we have to have proper scrutiny, you know that the way in which we even dealt with the tax credits. The tax credits, the way that was, the cuts that were going to come through into tax credits were going to come through by statutory instrument. That was going to be a cut to people's wages and income.
But there was a protest and that was stopped.
But it was spotted.
So couldn't you do that
It was because
on
it was spotted, and what the government is doing is hoping that, I'm sure, that things won't be spotted by Parliament until it's too late. This is not the way to be doing Brexit. This is not the transparency that people voted for, and this is not what people expected, and that's why it's right.
It's the complete opposite. The government is going to bring primary legislation on the things that they want to change.
For a process of scrutiny and a Brexit that is going to deliver what people wanted and not negatively impact businesses, families and the economy.
You know, your party in office accepted Henry VIII on steroids over all that EU legislation going in the first place. We're now going to put it onto the UK statute, but so you and I can amend it and change it if we wish.
We will be returning to this issue, as will Commons today. Thank you very much indeed. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next...